the red dust of Kepler 44 to be swirled around Jake Miller's boots as he walked through the destroyed alien city. The buildings looked like broken glass towers, their walls cracked and fallen. 3 years of war had turned this place into a graveyard. Jake carried his medical bag in one hand and his rifle in the other. He was 28 years old and had been a field medic for 5 years. The war between humans and the Viridians had been going on since he arrived on this planet. Every day brought more wounded soldiers and more death. "Keep moving, Miller," called Sergeant Tony Davis from ahead. "We need to check this sector and get back to base before dark." Jake nodded and followed his squad through the rubble. The Viridians were reptile-like aliens with shiny scales that changed color. They were smart and had better weapons than humans, but they were not as strong. Most humans thought they were just another enemy to fight. The squad walked past empty buildings and burned vehicles. Jake had seen places like this before. The Viridians lived in families just like humans did. They had children and homes and dreams. But war made everyone forget that the enemy was more than just a target. "This place gives me the creeps," said Private Mike Chen, kicking at a piece of broken metal. "Why do we have to patrol here anyway? There's nothing left." "Orders are orders," Davis replied. "Command wants to make sure no Viridian forces are hiding in the ruins." Jake stopped walking. He heard something strange. It was very quiet, like a whisper or a soft cry.
"Oh."
The other soldiers kept walking, but Jake stood still and listened. "You guys hear that?" he asked. "Hear what?" Davis turned around. "We don't have time for ghost stories, Miller. Let's go." Jake heard it again. God. It was definitely a voice, and it sounded scared and weak. It was coming from under a pile of broken concrete and metal about 20 feet away. "There's someone under that rubble," Jake said, pointing to the pile. Davis walked over and looked at the debris. "Even if there is, it's probably a Viridian. We're not here to play rescue games with the enemy." "What if it's a human prisoner?" Jake asked. "Then we would have heard about missing personnel." "Come on, we're wasting time." The squad started walking away, but Jake could not move.
"Oh."
The crying sound came again, and this time he was sure. Someone was trapped under there, and they were hurt. Jake had been a medic long enough to know the sound of pain. His training told him to help anyone who was injured, no matter who they were. But his orders told him to follow his squad and not take risks. "I'm going to check it out," Jake said. Davis stopped and turned around. His face was angry. "That's a direct order, Miller. We leave now. Give me 2 minutes. If someone is alive under there, we need to know. If it's a Viridian, we don't need to know anything. They're the enemy, remember?" Jake looked at his sergeant. Davis was a good soldier, but he had lost too. Many friends in this war. It had made him hard and cold. Jake understood that, but he could not ignore someone who needed help. 2 minutes, Jake said again. "That's all I need." Davis shook his head. "Fine, 2 minutes. But if you get yourself killed trying to save a lizard, I'm not explaining it to Captain Brooks." Jake ran to the pile of rubble and started moving pieces of concrete. The crying sound got louder. Could tell it was close to the surface. "Hello?" he called out. "Can you hear me?" A weak voice answered in the Viridian language. Jake did not understand the words, but he could hear the fear and pain. He moved more rocks and found a small opening. Inside the opening, Jake saw something that made his heart stop. It was a young Viridian, but not a soldier. It was a child, maybe 12 years old, in human terms. Her scales were normally bright blue and green, but now they were turning gray. Strange, glowing liquid was coming from cuts on her arms and legs. The alien child looked up at Jake with large, frightened eyes. She tried to move, but cried out in pain. Jake could see that her leg was badly hurt, probably broken. She was dying, and she knew it. For a moment, Jake forgot about the war. He forgot about orders and enemies and everything else. All he saw was a scared child who needed help. "Hey, it's okay," Jake said softly, even though he knew she could not understand his words. "I'm going to get you out of there." The child looked at him with confusion. She had probably never seen a human this close before. Her people were taught that humans were monsters who wanted to destroy everything. Oh. But Jake was not acting like a monster. He was trying to help her. Jake reached into the opening and carefully touched the child's arm. Her skin was cold and getting colder. In his medical training, he had learned that when someone was in shock, their body temperature dropped. This alien child was going into shock, and without help, she would die soon. Miller. Davis shouted from behind him, "Time's up. We're leaving now." Jake looked back at his squad, then at the dying child. He had to make a choice. He could follow orders, leave the child, and pretend he never found her. Or he could do what his heart told him was right. The child made a soft sound and tried to reach toward Jake with her small hand. Her eyes were full of hope for the first time since he found her. She was asking him to save her without saying a word. Jake made his decision. He turned to face Davis and said the words that would change everything, not leaving her. Sergeant Davis stared at Jake like he had lost his mind. The other soldiers in the squad looked nervous. All knew that refusing a direct order during wartime was serious trouble. "Miller, you better think about what you're saying," Davis said in a low voice. "I'm giving you one last chance to follow orders." Jake looked down at the alien child. She was getting weaker by the minute. Her breathing was shallow and fast. The glowing liquid from her wounds was spreading across her. Grayscales. He had seen death many times before, and this child was close to dying. "I can't leave her," Jake said. "She's just a kid." "She's the enemy," Davis replied. "You're about to become a traitor." Jake carefully lifted the alien child from the rubble. She was lighter than a human child would be, and her skin felt strange under his hands. She made soft crying sounds, but did not fight him. Her big eyes looked at him with trust that made his chest feel tight. "Mark this location," Davis told the other soldiers. "Will report it when we get back to base." "Miller, you're under arrest for disobeying direct orders." Jake ignored the sergeant and started walking toward their transport vehicle. The alien child was getting colder in his arms. He needed to get her medical help fast, but he could not take her to the human medical center. The doctors there would either refuse to treat her or use her for experiments. During the ride back to base, Jake sat in the back of the transport and tried to keep the child warm. She was unconscious now, which was probably better. At least she was not in pain. Sam Torres, Jake's best friend and fellow medic, sat across from him. Sam looked worried and confused. He kept staring at the alien child like he could not believe what he was seeing. "Jake, what are you doing?" Sam whispered so the other soldiers could not hear. "This is crazy. They're going to court-martial you." "No," Jake said. "But look at her, Sam. She's dying. How can I just let that happen?" Sam shook his head. "She's not human, Jake. We don't even know how to treat her kind. You might be risking your life for nothing, maybe, but I have to try." When they reached the base, Davis took Jake straight to Captain Lisa Brooks. She was a fair officer who cared about her soldiers, but she also followed rules. Jake knew he was in serious trouble. Captain Brooks looked at the alien child in Jake's arms. Her expression was unreadable. "Put her down, Miller," she said. "Captain, she needs medical attention," Jake said. "Put her down. That's an order." Jake gently placed the child on a chair in the captain's office. The alien girl was barely breathing now. Her scales had turned almost completely gray. "Explain." "Yourself, Miller, Captain Brooks," said Jake. Told her everything. Explained how he found the child trapped under the rubble, how she was clearly not a soldier, and how she was dying without medical help. He knew his reasons sounded weak compared to military law, but they were the truth. "Refused a direct order from your squad leader," the captain said when Jake finished. "You brought an enemy alien onto this base without permission? Do you understand how serious this is?" "Yes, ma'am. But I couldn't leave her to die." Captain Brooks walked over to the alien child and looked at her closely. The child's breathing was so weak it was hard to see her chest moving.
"Doctor."
"Amy Clark is our chief medical officer," the captain said. "She might be able to tell us more about the alien's condition. But Miller, I want you to understand something. Even if we try to help this child, you're still facing serious charges." "I understand, Captain." An hour later, Dr. Clark arrived at the captain's office. She was a smart woman who had studied alien biology, but she had never treated a living Viridian before. Most of her knowledge came from studying dead bodies after battles. Dr. Clark examined the alien child carefully. She checked her pulse, temperature, and breathing. The child did not wake up during the examination. "This is fascinating," Dr. Clark said. "Her body temperature is much lower than it should be, and there's glowing substance coming from her wounds." "I've never seen anything like it." "Can you help her?" Jake asked. "I don't know. Viridian biology is very different from human biology. What looks like an infection to us might be normal for them. What looks like medicine to us might be poison. To them?" The alien child made a weak sound and opened her eyes. She looked around the room with fear and confusion. When she saw Jake, she reached toward him with a shaking hand. Jake moved closer to her. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe." Child said something in her own language. Her voice was very weak. "She's trying to tell us something," Dr. Clark said, "but we have no way to understand her." Jake knelt down beside the chair and took the child's small hand in his. Her skin was ice cold. "We're going to help you," he said, hoping his tone of the voice would comfort her even if she could not understand his words. The child looked at Jake for a long moment. Then she pointed to herself and said one word very clearly. "Zira." "Zira," Jake repeated. "Is that your name?" The alien child nodded weakly and tried to smile. Then she closed her eyes again. "Her name is Zira," Jake told Captain Brooks and Dr. Clark. "She's not just an enemy. She's a person with a name." Dr. Clark looked troubled. "Jake, I want to help her, but I'm not sure how. If I give her the wrong treatment, I could kill her faster than her injuries will." "Then we need to learn," Jake said fast. Captain Brooks made a decision that surprised everyone. Dr. Clark set up a private room in the medical bay. "Miller, you'll assist her in trying to treat the alien." "What? But this stays between us. If word gets out that we're treating an enemy on this base, we'll all be in trouble." "Thank you, Captain," Jake said. "Don't thank me yet," she replied. "If this child dies or if Command finds out what we're doing, we're all finished." "Or Miller, you're still facing charges for disobeying orders?" "Oh." Jake nodded. He understood the risks, but he also knew he had made the right choice. As he carried Zira to the medical bay, he could feel her weak heartbeat against his chest. She was still alive, and that gave him hope. But Jake also knew that keeping her alive would be the hardest thing he had ever tried to do. He was about to attempt medicine on a species he knew nothing about, with limited time and resources, while keeping it all secret from his commanding officers. The risk was enormous. But Jake had already decided that some things were worth risking everything for. Jake had been working for 2 days straight trying to save Zira's life. He had moved her to an old storage room in the medical bay where no one would find her. The room was small and dark, but it was private. Sam Torres helped him bring medical supplies without asking too many questions. Zira was getting worse. Her gray scales were now turning white, and the glowing liquid from her wounds had stopped flowing. Jake thought this might be a good sign at first, but Dr. Clark told him it was actually very bad. The liquid was supposed to be there. "It's like her body is shutting down," Dr. Clark said as she checked Zira's vital signs. "Her heart rate is slowing and her temperature keeps dropping. Nothing we've tried is working." Jake looked at Zira lying. On the makeshift bed they had created, she had been unconscious for most of the past day. Sometimes she would wake up and look at him with those big eyes, but she was too weak to speak. "There has to be something we're missing," Jake said. "Some piece of information about how her body works. The problem is that we're treating her like a human," Dr. Clark replied. "But she's not human. Her whole biology might work differently than ours." Jake had been thinking the same thing. Every time he tried to treat Zira's wounds or give her medicine, her condition seemed to get worse instead of better. It was like he was fighting against her body instead of helping it. "What if we're doing this all wrong?" Jake asked. "What if the things we think are bad for her are actually good for her?" Dr. Clark looked at him with interest. "What do you mean?" "Look at this glowing stuff that was coming from her wounds. We thought it was infection, so we cleaned it away and gave her antibiotics. But what if it's supposed to be there? What if it's part of how her body heals itself?" "That's possible," Dr. Clark said slowly. "But how do we test that theory without making her worse?" Jake had an idea, but it was dangerous. "What if we studied the samples we took from her wounds? Maybe we..." can figure out what that glowing liquid actually does. For the next several hours, Jake and Dr. Clark worked with the samples under a microscope. What they found was amazing. The glowing liquid was full of tiny organisms that looked like nothing they had ever seen before. They were not bacteria or viruses. They were something completely different. "These organisms are still alive," Dr. Clark said with excitement. "And look at this. They seem to be working together, like they're building something."
Why?
Jake watched the tiny creatures under the microscope. They were moving in patterns, connecting to each other and sharing materials. It reminded him of how human cells work together to heal wounds, but this was much more complex. "What if these aren't infections?" Jake said. "What if they're helpers? What if Viridians need these organisms to stay healthy? Like a symbiotic relationship," Dr. Clark said. "The organisms help the Viridians heal, and the Viridians provide them with a place to live." Jake felt a rush of hope. This could be the answer they were looking for. "So when we gave Zira antibiotics, we killed the organisms she needed to get better. And when we cleaned away the glowing liquid, we removed her body's natural healing system," Dr. Clark added. They looked at each other with excitement and fear. If they were right, they might be able to save Zira. But if they were wrong, they could kill her. "We need to test this," Jake said. "But how do we get more of these organisms?" "We still have some samples," Dr. Clark said. "If we can create the right environment, maybe we can grow more of them." Jake and Dr. Clark worked through the night, trying to create a culture where the organisms could multiply. They tried different temperatures, different chemicals, and different conditions. Most of their attempts failed, but slowly they began to understand what the organisms needed. "They like it warm and wet," Dr. Clark said, "and they seem to need some kind of mineral that's not common on Earth." "What about the mineral supplements we found in the Viridian medical supplies we captured last month?" Jake asked. They had taken medical equipment from a destroyed Viridian outpost, but no one had been able to figure out how to use it. Now Jake wondered if those supplies might contain what they needed. Dr. Clark found the captured supplies in the base storage area. Among the strange tools and containers, they found several bottles of liquid that glowed just like the substance from Zira's wounds. "This is it," Dr. Clark said. "This has to be some kind of medical supplement for their healing organisms." G felt nervous about using alien medicine on Zira, but they were running out of options. She was dying, and their human treatments were not working. "Are we sure about this?" Dr. Clark asked. "If we're wrong, we could kill her immediately." Jake looked at Zira. She was so still and pale that he could barely tell she was breathing. "She's dying anyway. At least this gives her a chance." They prepared a small amount of the alien medicine and mixed it with some of the organisms they had grown in their culture. Jake gently applied the mixture to one of Zira's smaller wounds to test it. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the area around the wound began to glow with a soft blue light. The gray scales started to show hints of their original color. "It's working," Dr. Clark whispered. Jake felt his heart racing with excitement and fear. They had found the key to helping Zira, but they still did not know if it would be enough to save her life. Just then, the storage room door opened. Captain Brooks stood in the doorway, staring at them with surprise and concern. "What exactly is going on here?" she asked. Jake realized that their secret was out. Captain Brooks had discovered their unauthorized medical experiment, and now they would all face the consequences. But as he looked at Zira's wound beginning to heal, he knew he would make the same choice again. "We're saving her life," Jake said. Simply, Captain Brooks stepped into the room and looked at Zira. The alien child's breathing was already getting stronger. More of her scales were returning to their normal color. Captain Brooks asked Jake, explained their discovery about the symbiotic organisms and how human medicine had been making Zira worse instead of better. As he talked, he could see the captain's expression change from anger to amazement. "You figured this out in 2 days?" she asked. "We had to," Jake said. She was dying. Captain Brooks looked at Zira for a long moment. The alien child's eyes fluttered open, and for the first time in days she looked alert and aware. "Zira," Jake said softly. The alien child turned her head toward him and smiled weakly. She said something in her own language, but her voice was Stronger than before? I think she's thanking you, Captain Brooks said quietly. Over the next 3 days, Zira grew stronger. Her scales returned to their beautiful blue and green colors, and she could sit up and eat small amounts of food. Jake had learned a few words in her language, and she had picked up some basic English. Words, too. Water, Zero said, pointing to the cup Jake held. Her voice was still weak, but it was clear. Yes, water, Jake replied with a smile. Good job, Zira, she smiled back at him. It was the first time Jake had seen a Viridian smile, and it looked almost human. Large eyes crinkled at the corners, and her mouth curved upward in a way that showed happiness. Captain Brooks visited the storage room every day. She brought food and supplies, but she also brought bad news. Colonel Pete Johnson is asking questions about your whereabouts. Miller, she said. He knows you were arrested for disobeying orders, but he doesn't know about the alien child yet. Much time do we have? Jake asked. Not much. The colonel wants to see you tomorrow morning. If he finds out what we've been doing, we'll all be in serious trouble. Jake looked at Zira. She was listening to their conversation even though she could not understand most of the words. She seemed to sense that something was wrong. Home, Zira said suddenly, pointing toward the wall. Zira, home. Jake realized she was pointing in the direction of the Viridian territory. She wanted to go back to her people. Your home is that way? Jake asked, pointing in the same direction. Zira nodded. Then she said something in her own language and made gestures with her hands. She was trying to tell them something important that they could not understand. Dr. Clark, who had been quietly checking Zira's medical condition, looked worried. Jake, I think she's trying to warn us about something. Zira tried again, speaking, slowly and using the English words she knew. Father, ... angry, ... big, boom, humans gone. Jake felt his blood turn cold. Big boom, like an explosion? Zira nodded seriously. She drew a picture in the dust on the floor showing what looked like buildings falling down and people running. She's saying her father is planning some kind of attack, Captain Brooks said. A big attack that will destroy human buildings and kill people. Zira pointed to herself and said, Father thinks Zira dead. Father very angry. Want hurt humans. Understood now. Zira's father thought she had been killed in the human attack on their city. He was planning revenge, something big enough to wipe out the human colony. We have to get her back to her people, Jake said. If they see that she's alive and that we saved her, maybe they'll call off the attack. That's impossible, Captain, Brooks said. The battle lines are heavily guarded. We'd never make it through. We have to try, Jake insisted. How many people will die if we don't? Dr. Clark spoke up. There's another problem. Even if we could get to Viridian territory, how do we know they won't just shoot us on sight? We're humans carrying weapons in their land. Jake looked at Zira. She had been listening to their conversation with growing understanding. We take you home to your father. Will you tell him that we helped you? Zira nodded eagerly. Yes, Zira, tell father. Humans good. Humans help Zira. But how do we get past both armies? Captain Brooks asked. The fighting has gotten worse in the past few days. Both sides are preparing for major battles. Jake had an idea, but it was extremely dangerous. What if we use a medical transport? We could approach under a medical flag. Even in war, medical vehicles are usually protected, usually, Captain Brooks said. But not always. And if Colonel Johnson finds out we took military equipment to help an enemy alien, he'll have us all executed for treason. The room fell silent. Everyone knew the risks were enormous. They could all die attempting this mission, and even if they survived, they would face court-martial and prison. But Jake also knew what would happen if they did nothing. Zira's father would launch his revenge attack. Hundreds or thousands of humans would die, and the war would become even more brutal. I'll go alone, Jake said.
Away.
If something goes wrong, you won't be blamed, Captain Brooks said. Firmly, if we do this, we do it together. But I need to know that everyone understands what we're risking. Sam Torres, who had been quiet during most of the conversation, finally spoke up. I'm in. Jake saved my life twice during this war. I owe him. Dr. Clark nodded slowly. If there's a chance to prevent a massacre, we have to take it. I'll come too. You might need medical support. Captain Brooks looked at each of them. It's probably the stupidest thing I've ever agreed to do, but you're right. We can't let innocent people die when we have a chance to stop it. Spent the next several hours planning their mission. They would take a medical transport vehicle and approach the Viridian lines from the east, where the fighting was less intense. Zero would use an emergency beacon to identify herself to her people before they got too close. What if her father doesn't believe us? Dr. Clark asked. What if he thinks we're using her as some kind of trick? We'll probably die, Jake said honestly. But at least we'll have tried to do the right thing. Zira had been listening to their plans. She reached out and took Jake's hand in her small one. Jake, good human, she said. Zira, tell Father. Father, listen, Zira. Everything depended on an alien child being able to convince her father that humans were not the monsters he thought they were. As night fell, they made their final preparations. Captain Brooks had obtained a medical transport and supplies. Sam had gathered emergency medical equipment. Dr. Clark had prepared sedatives in case they needed to treat wounded soldiers from either side. Jake sat with Zira, teaching her a few more English words she might need. Peace, he said. Can you say peace? Peace? Zira repeated carefully. Jake, want peace? Yes, Jake said. Jake wants peace. Zira wants peace. Zira wants peace, she said with a big smile. Jake looked at this alien child who had become so important to him. A week ago she had been just another enemy. She was their only hope of preventing a disaster. Tomorrow we go, Jake told her. Tomorrow we take you home. Zira nodded and squeezed his hand. Tomorrow, Zira go home. Tomorrow peace. Odd. Jake hoped she was right, but he knew that tomorrow would be the most dangerous day of his life. They were about to drive into a war zone carrying an alien child, hoping that love between a father and daughter would be stronger than the hatred between two species as he prepared for sleep. Jake wondered if he would live to see another sunset, but he also knew that some choices were worth any risk. Saving Zira had taught him that doing the right thing was more important than following orders or staying safe. Tomorrow would prove whether that belief was strong enough to stop a war. The medical transport moved slowly across the battlefield in the early morning light. Jake sat in the back with Zira, while Captain Brooks drove and Sam Torres watched for enemy soldiers. Dr. Clark kept checking their medical supplies. But everyone knew she was just trying to stay calm. The landscape around them was destroyed. Burned trees, broken vehicles, and deep holes from explosions covered the ground. This had once been a beautiful valley, but 3 years of war had turned it into a wasteland. Contact ahead, Sam said quietly. Human checkpoint. Captain Brooks slowed the vehicle and showed their medical identification to the soldiers at the checkpoint.
The guards look suspicious, but let them pass.
They thought the medical team was going to treat wounded soldiers near the front lines. But much further? Dr. Clark asked. About 5 miles to the Viridian territory, Captain Brooks replied. But we'll hit the real fighting before then. Zira had been quiet during the journey, but now she looked nervous. She could hear explosions in the distance, and she knew they were getting close to her people's land. Scared? Jake asked her. Zira nodded, father angry. Maybe shoot first, listen later. Jake understood her fear. Her father thought she was dead and blamed humans for killing her. When he saw humans approaching with his daughter, his first reaction might be to attack. You have the emergency beacon? Jake asked. Zero showed him a small device that Dr. Clark had found among the captured Viridian medical supplies. It would send a signal that identified Zero to any Viridian forces nearby. When do I use? Zira asked. When we see your people, before they see us. The transport hit a bump, and everyone bounced in their seats. The road had been damaged by fighting, and Captain Brooks had to drive carefully to avoid the worst holes. Movement. Ahead, Sam said suddenly. Looks like a patrol. Through the front window, Jake could see soldiers running between the broken trees. Their scales glittered in the sunlight, marking them as Viridians. This is it, Captain Brooks said. Everyone. Ready? Jake felt his heart pounding. Everything they had planned led to this moment. Either Zero would be able to stop her people from attacking, or they would all die in the next few minutes. Use the beacon now, Jake told Zero. Zero pressed a button on the small device. It made a high-pitched sound that hurt human ears, but Jake knew it was sending a message in the Viridian language. The Viridian soldiers stopped moving. They looked confused and started talking to each other in their own language. One of them had a larger communication device and was speaking into it quickly. They heard the signal, Dr. Clark said, but they still have weapons pointed at us. Captain Brooks stopped the transport about 50 feet from the Viridian patrol. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. One of the Viridian soldiers approached. The vehicle slowly. His scales were dark green with red markings that showed he was an officer. He carried a weapon, but did not point it directly at them. The officer said something in the Viridian language. His voice sounded angry and suspicious. He wants to know who we are, Zero translated. I tell him. Zero opened the transport door and stepped out slowly. When the Viridian officer saw her, his weapon dropped to his side. He stared at her like he was seeing a ghost. Zero spoke to the officer in their language. Jake could not understand the words, but he could hear the emotion. In her voice, she was explaining what had happened to her and how the humans had saved her life. The officer listened with growing amazement. Then he spoke into his communication device very quickly. Jake guessed he was calling for more soldiers, or maybe 4. Zero's father? What's happening? Jake asked Zero. Officer calls Commander Thex. My father comes soon. Within 10 minutes, more Viridian vehicles arrived. Jake counted at least 20 soldiers, all with weapons ready. In the center of the group was a large Viridian with golden scales and the markings of a high commander. Zero ran toward him. Father. Commander Thex looked at his daughter like he could not believe she was real. He knelt down and held her tightly while she spoke to him in their language. Jake could see tears in the commander's large eyes. The other Viridian soldiers watched this reunion with confusion. They had been told that humans had killed Zero, but here she was, alive and healthy, brought to them by humans. After several minutes, Commander Thex stood up and walked toward the human transport. His expression was hard to read, but he did not look angry anymore. He looked thoughtful and confused. You are the humans who saved my daughter, he asked in heavily accented English. Jake stepped out of the transport. Yes, sir. My name is Jake Miller. I'm a medic. Zero tells me you found her dying and brought her back to health. She says you risked your lives to help her. We did what anyone should do, Jake replied. She needed help. Commander Thex studied Jake carefully. Why? Why would you help an enemy child? Jake thought about how to answer. The truth was simple, but he was not sure the Viridian commander would understand it, because she was hurt and scared, Jake said. It didn't matter that she was Viridian. She was just a child who needed help. Commander Thex translated this for the other Viridian soldiers. They talked among themselves in surprised voices. The idea that humans would risk their lives for an enemy child was completely new to them. Zero also tells me that you learned our medicine to heal her, Commander Thex continued. That you discovered things about our biology that even some of our own doctors do not know. Dr. Clark did most of that work, Jake said, gesturing toward their medical officer. She's very smart. Dr. Clark stepped forward. We learned that. Our human medicine was actually making Zero worse. We had to completely change our approach and use your healing methods instead. Commander Thex looked amazed. You threw away your own medical knowledge to save an alien child using methods you did not understand? Yes, Dr. Clark said simply. It was the only way to save her life. For a long moment, no one spoke. The Viridian soldiers looked at the humans with new expressions. Instead of seeing enemies, they were starting to see people who had shown incredible kindness to one of their children. Zero ran to Jake and hugged his leg. Jake saved Zero life, she announced to all the soldiers. Jake, good human. All humans good. Commander Thex knelt down beside his daughter. Zero, are you sure about this? These humans really helped you? Yes, father. Jake and friends save Zero. Give medicine. Give food. Keep safe. Now Zero healthy because humans good people. Commander Thex stood up and faced Jake again. My daughter says you taught her some of your language, and you learned some of ours. A little bit, Jake said. She's very smart. She learned much faster than I did. What did you teach her? Jake smiled. The most important word was peace. Peace, Zero said proudly. Jake want peace. Zero want peace. Father want peace. Commander Thex looked at his daughter, then at the human medical team, then at his own soldiers. Jake could see him thinking about everything that had happened. I was planning to attack your people tomorrow, Commander, Dex said quietly. A massive assault to avenge my daughter's death. Thousands would have died. We know, Captain Brooks said. That's why we brought her back to you. You risked your lives to save thousands of people you have never met. Yes, Jake said. War is terrible enough without unnecessary killing. Commander Thex was quiet for a long time. Finally, he turned to one of his officers and gave orders in the Viridian language. The officer looked surprised but nodded and spoke into his communication device. I have just called off the attack, Commander Thex announced, and I am ordering all Viridian forces to stop fighting for 24 hours. A ceasefire? Captain Brooks asked. The beginning of one, perhaps? If humans can show such kindness to one alien child, maybe there is hope for peace between our peoples. Zira clapped her hands with joy. Peace, peace. Jake felt a weight lift. From his chest, they had done it. Not only had they saved Zira's life, but they had prevented a massacre and opened the door to ending the war. 6 months later, Jake worked as a medical liaison during the ongoing peace talks between humans and Viridians. The war was not completely over, but both sides had agreed to stop the major fighting while they negotiated. Zira visited him often. She had become fluent in English and was helping other humans and Viridians learn to communicate with each other. Her story had spread to both species, becoming a symbol of what was possible when people chose compassion over hatred. Jake Zira said during one of her visits, Father says you are a hero.